Hi, Otters. We are back to read the final section of the chapter we've been reading this week in I Love You, Michael Collins. If you recall from the reading from yesterday, Mammy was getting ready for her moonwalk party, and Buster came over a little earlier than anticipated because things kind of started happening. They had some hors d'oeuvres and were watching the television, and the space shuttle had already landed on the moon, but nothing was happening yet. So I'll read these last couple paragraphs that we finished off with, and then we'll move on. What do you think they're doing right now? I asked, to change the subject, to get Buster's mind off things. Mine too. What do you think is taking so long? They have to make sure the Eagle will be ready for takeoff again. Before they can even leave it at all, they have to make sure the Eagle is ready, in case they have to depart suddenly. What about Michael Collins? I said. What do you think he's doing right now? Spinning, waiting. The Columbia has to keep spinning. Otherwise, it would get too hot from the sun striking the same side all the time, and then it would burn up. He's spinning and orbiting the moon while he waits for them to come back. It takes him 2 hours to orbit, and for half of each orbit, when he's on the far side of the moon and therefore turned away from Earth, there's no radio contact at all. Somehow, that idea felt too big for my brain, so I didn't think about it, not just then. Instead, I got up to clear the dishes. Buster stopped me. "I'll get those," he said. "You cooked. It's only fair." So that's what happened. Buster cleared and washed all the dishes, while I went into the living room, sat down on the couch, and put my feet up like a lady of leisure. It did occur to me that if my dad always did the dishes after my mom cooked, like Buster was doing right now, my mom might appreciate that fact. And now that I taught my dad how to wash dishes, maybe he might do that someday, if they ever came back. Not long after the sound of running water stopped, Buster came in with forks and big slices of the cake we made together yesterday, all set out on plates. We ate those and had seconds. I'd forgotten to make the Jell-O, but a person can't always remember everything. And then you know what we did, Michael Collins? We just watched and waited. Picture a big clock on the wall, the minute hand sweeping round and round while the hour hand goes more slowly. It's a funny thing about waiting for something for a real long time. No matter how worried or scared or even flat out excited you are because of all the things that still might happen, tiredness gets you. In the end, it was all I could do to keep awake, and it felt like, if it wouldn't be so painful, I could have sure used some of those fancy toothpicks to prop my eyelids open. And Buster looked the same. But then, just as I was about to drift off, it happened. "Holy moly!" Buster cried. And just for once, I said "holy moly" right along with him, because there, running as a caption along the bottom of the Magnavox color TV screen, it now read, in words that it would have been impossible to imagine before, "Live voice of astronaut Armstrong from surface of moon." I'd seen live from Ohio and live from Paris and even live from Vietnam and live from almost any other place you can imagine. But no one had ever seen this before, what people were seeing on television screens across the country, the world even. Live from surface of moon. There was Neil Armstrong, shadowy, but still there he was, backing down the steps of the Eagle. The legs of the Eagle looked like they were covered in tinfoil as he backed down the steps still separating him from the moon. 9 steps to be exact. I know because I counted them. And when he got to the bottom, he placed a foot on the moon. At 10:56 p.m. today, On July 20th, 1969, for the first time ever, a man put a foot on the moon. I tell you, Michael Collins, Buster and I were wide awake now. We were awake to hear Neil Armstrong say, as he set that first foot down, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." I tell you something else, Michael Collins. Buster always says that you can learn anything in the world from books, and I know he's right. You can. Certainly, there are a lot of words in books, but there aren't words, not really, to describe what it is like to witness a miracle firsthand. A man, Michael Collins, on the moon. There are facts, and facts don't begin to cover it, but I will try to tell you what some of them were, since you are one of the few people who was not able to see this on TV tonight. I may get the order of some of the facts wrong, but that is because there was so much excitement and so much happened, and I am finishing this letter so late. Walter Cronkite said, "Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon." I felt Buster's hand close over mine. We watched as Neil Armstrong took pictures with a camera, collected rocks and samples to bring back, and set up experiments for scientists at home. For about 20 minutes, Neil Armstrong was the only man walking on the moon, the only man who had ever walked there. Then finally, at 11:15 p.m., Buzz Aldrin joined him. Once they were together, they put up an American flag, and Buzz Aldrin saluted it. It looked like it was quite a struggle to get it right, and Walter Cronkite said it had wires sewn into it to keep it stiff, because otherwise it would just hang straight down, limp, with no wind to buoy it. Buzz Aldrin tried to run, but wound up just bouncing all over the place like a kangaroo. They both did. "You see those footprints they're leaving?" Buster said. "There's no rain or wind on the moon. Their footprints will be there forever. But not yours, Michael Collins." Then President Nixon called, in a telephone radio transmission from the Oval Office of the White House to the surface of the moon, to congratulate the astronauts and to say, "For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to earth." I suppose I should have paid more attention to that last part of what President Nixon said, but I didn't. Things were happening too quickly now. There was too much to see. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin put up a plaque. It said, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." I have to tell you, I liked that it said men from the planet Earth instead of American men from the planet Earth. I liked that it just says men, no country specified, even if sometimes it feels like we've been competing in the space race with the Russians forever. It did have President Nixon's signature at the bottom with President, United States of America, under that, but it didn't seem to me like that part mattered as much as the rest. For 2.5 hours, Buster and I watched this miracle together. At moments, I wondered if my various family members, wherever they each were now, were watching too. Were they seeing exactly what I saw? And if so, what did they think of it all? And then Armstrong and Aldrin climbed back into their four-legged spider, the lunar module, the Eagle. Right before getting back inside, They jettisoned their backpacks from the top of the 9-step staircase. "What are they doing that for?" I said. "They don't need them anymore," Buster said. "They'll spend the night on the moon, sleeping in the Eagle, before trying to meet up with Michael Collins tomorrow." I should have thought more about that trying, just like I should have thought more about President Nixon's return safely, but somehow I didn't. Instead, I was thinking about Armstrong and Aldrin leaving their backpacks on the moon, about how right since liftoff you'd been getting rid of parts and things once they were no longer needed. It made me think again about what my dad had said about Apollo 11 not even being reusable and how he'd made that sound bad. But so what if it wasn't? So what if they kept casting parts aside once those items were no longer required? They'd needed it all, every last piece of it, to work properly together in order to get to where they wanted to be. With the best part over, I turned off the TV. And then, without even discussing it with each other first, Buster and I went outside. We hadn't noticed, but while we were watching, it had rained and the ground was all wet. It was also cooler. Immediately, I began calling for Campbell, thinking if she'd been caught in the rain, for sure she'd want to come inside to get her feet dry, even though the rain had stopped. Buster yelled for her too, but nothing. "I'm sure she's fine," he said, sounding confident. "I'm sure too," I said, even though I wasn't. "Just a second," Buster said, racing over to his house, from where I could still hear the sound of the party. When he came back, he had a beach blanket and he laid it on the ground. "Here," he said, "you don't want to get your outfit all wet and dirty." I actually didn't care about my outfit at that point, yet it made me feel good that he cared about it, for my sake. Sometimes I feel like I should tell you more about Buster than I do, but the fact of the matter is, Michael Collins, that Buster is just good, like you, and that's all there is. You know how good he is? I think that all night, even though he knew how happy I was to have him there, he also knew how much I missed my family. So right then, he gave me a gift out of the blue. Buster told me his real name, Michael Collins. I would love to tell you what it is. It is just as purely awful as promised. But I gave him my word, and I have to keep my friend's confidence. Some things I can't even tell you, Michael Collins. After that, we just lay there, side by side, thinking our own thoughts as we stared up at the moon, now that the rain was over and the clouds were gone. The moon was so much different to us now than it had been even the day before, so much different than it would ever be again. We lay like that until Buster's mom started calling for him, later than she'd ever had to. Then Buster was gone. And I just stayed out in the backyard for a bit, me alone, looking up at the moon, thinking about you spinning around it alone. I hope the Columbia is spinning like it's supposed to, so that it doesn't get too hot from the sun, because then you would burn up and die. I hope that for the half of each orbit during which you are on the far side of the moon and therefore turned away from the earth, and so are unable even to have any radio contact, you do not feel alone. You do not feel too alone. Has any man ever been more alone in the history of the world? Maybe John Fairfax in his rowboat. But other than him, really, I hope you do not feel too alone. Because you know what? You give us hope. After tonight, there will still be bad things going on all over the world. There will still be Vietnam. There will still be the race riots. There will still be all kinds of bad things, even in my own house. But you and the other astronauts, tonight you give us hope that miracles can happen and things can get better and we can all come together to want the same good thing. You give us hope. Sleep tight, Michael Collins. Sleep tight. Sincerely yours, Mammy. All right, readers, that is the end of that chapter. So make sure to go back into Canvas to read the final discussion question for this chapter. Talk to you soon.